Welcome to the Diverse Minds podcast, where we give you the tips, tools and techniques you need to be a mentally healthy and inclusive leader. Each week, you'll hear about a variety of topics linked to mental health, wellbeing and diversity that will enhance both your professional practice and personal wellbeing. Welcome to the 64th episode of the Diverse Minds podcast. And with the second lockdown in England well underway, and mental health and wellbeing is now of paramount importance, even more so than the first lockdown. So what are the ways in which workplaces can really create and sustain wellbeing initiatives that work? Where's the research, especially with the pressure placed on healthcare and social services? Well, I'm delighted to be joined by Dr Jermaine M. Ravalier. He's a reader and work in wellbeing psychology at Bath Spa University. His research interests are in the area of mental health and wellbeing in the public sector. Perfect, right? As such, he works with public sector organisations and in particular health and social care providers and employers to work with employees to co-develop, i.e. with their staff, mental health and wellbeing interventions. By supporting the wellbeing of these key frontline workers during this ongoing COVID pandemic, we are able to support them in providing the support and care that their patients and service users need. Jermaine feels it's important to understand the impact that race and privilege has on the lives of people in the UK. As such, a second area of his passion and interest is that of diversity of students and staff within universities, and making the general public more aware of the positive impact that increased diversity can have on everyone's experience. Additionally, however, there is extant national level statistics demonstrating that Black people in the UK are recipient of poorer outcomes in terms of health, social care, policing, the judiciary, education, the workplace, and many more of our nationally treasured institutions. And if you're interested in this, please do check out podcast episode on Black mental health. But by talking about and understanding these issues, Jermaine hopes that we can close the inequality gap, not just for Black people, but all members of global majority diaspora groups across the country. And among other things, Jermaine is also the Research Excellence Framework Lead for Psychology at his institution and organised this year's extremely successful Black History Month series of events in October. So a huge welcome to the show.
Hi, Layla. It's good to speak to you again.
And I'm just so grateful for your time because I know how super busy you are and I know how under pressure universities are. So the first thing I wanted to ask you, Jermaine, was can you tell our listeners about the study of organisational and health psychology? Because it might be familiar to some people, but not so familiar to others.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big area, right? So organizational psychology is massive. And I think as a discipline, it kind of looks at 8 or 9 separate areas. But the thing that I particularly like to look at is the health of employees, especially in the public sector. So what I do is I effectively work with NHS staff and social care staff in order to kind of develop interventions which will hopefully support their mental health and well-being at work. So it's a big and very topical issue at the moment, as you would know. I think the thing about the research that I do is that I don't think of myself as the researcher and therefore I'm the expert in this, in the situation and the things that people do. So yeah, the study of organizational psychology, in the UK, it's often called occupational psychology. In the States, it's called industrial organizational psychology, and it's called various things across the world. And generally, we look at kind of 8 or 9 really big areas. And as a researcher or an academic or a practitioner, you kind of delve down into your expertise into one area. And the thing that I look at is mental health and well-being at work. And one of the things that I have about conducting research is that I don't think research should be done just for the sake of doing research. And I think it should have a tangible impact and a tangible outcome of some sort. And so the work that I do in particular, which is kind of synonymous with what a lot of other researchers do, is I look at the public sector. And in particular, I work very closely with NHS staff and with social care and social work staff, as well as teachers. And kind of the end outcome of a lot of my research is to look at co-developing, so working with staff, a series of well-being and mental health initiatives for those staff. So the way that I look at things is that I don't I, as the researcher, am an expert in developing interventions that might support people's mental health and well-being, because I'm not. The only people that kind of know their job and know the things that can be done in their workplace in order to support their mental health are the people that are doing the job. So I conduct research which is called co-development. So I kind of work with these staff in order to develop a series of interventions and then evaluate the interventions afterwards, which look to improve well-being.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think it's really interesting what you said about co-production, absolutely, or a co-development is crucial. And so what really drew you to this specific area of workplace well-being for the public sector? I'd love to know a bit more about that. Why that niche?
Well, before university, I kind of wanted to be what I call a proper doctor, so a medical doctor. That was the thing that I'd always wanted to do. And then A-levels hit and I didn't do as well as I should have or could have. So I just went to university and I did whatever. After my degree, I did a master's in occupational psychology, and my dissertation was with somebody who was really interested in the kind of physiological impacts that stress at work can have on health and well-being and organizational outcomes as well. So I was lucky enough to see a kind of a PhD studentship that was available in that exact same area that I'd just done my master's dissertation in. And I got it. And kind of, I've just been working in that ever since. And I think there were two things. So first of all, as I said, I kind of really wanted to just help people and make a difference. That was important to me. But secondly, kind of my family have pretty much all worked within the public sector. So whether it's my parents who work in the NHS, my wife is a social worker, her sister's a social worker. So I want to make things better for those people, but also I know that by making things better for those people, it improves outcomes for service users and patients. So kind of, it's all about helping and trying to make a difference. And that's why I've kind of stayed in this area.
And I love that joint up approach, Jermaine, because so many people don't understand that, or there's lots of different bits of strategy that don't join up. And so, in terms of public sector workplaces, then particularly with your focus on the NHS and social care, what can workplaces really do to embrace wellbeing in a genuine and meaningful way, especially given that those services are overstretched anyway, but we know what's happened over this period of COVID. We know that there are specific issues with racism, against Black, Asian, Southeast Asian communities. And that, of course, has a negative impact on wellbeing if it's not addressed. So through your research, what are some of the tangibles, things that public sector workplaces should and could be doing?
Yeah, so I think that there are quite a few things. And I think one of the things that people high up within these public sector organizations should do is just listen to and act on the voice of the people who are doing the actual job. So I think a lot of the time, people who are the highest up in public sector organizations, they're really good at the strategic stuff, but maybe less good at they don't know the job as well as a doctor does, or a nurse does, or a porter does, or a social worker does, or social work admin people do, right? And I think the first thing is you need to listen to those staff. And when they feed things back to you, you kind of have to act on them. So that's the thing. And then I think there needs to be a little bit of investment as well into mental health and well-being across the public sector, because we know that proactive investment saves people from becoming ill and going off sick, but we also know that then has an impact on the people that you're there to serve, right? On the patients and service users. So there are lots of things. There can be improvements in communication strategies. That's a big one. So at the moment, all organizations are going through massive change, right? And a lot of the time that change is just kind of dictated down towards staff, whereas a short period of actual consultation and feedback on that consultation would be useful, because frontline staff have the best ways and ideas and methods of improving things. There are probably silly organizational practices that need to be changed that are quite specific to organizations. But again, senior management may not be able to see those, but those doing the actual job do. And I just think that the focus on mental health and well-being should be taken away from making people more resilient. I hate this word resilience at work, because what it does is it kind of says, right, you as the individual social worker who is, I mean, my research showed that social workers, for example, they work on average every week more than 11 hours more than they're contracted to every week. So they're working like Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, plus Saturday, 9 to 5, plus a bit of Sunday. And so there's only so much resilience that individuals can show under that sort of strain. So actually, rather than trying to make people more resilient and be able to look after themselves, I think it should be on organizations to make changes in order to reduce the kind of the cause of the sickness, rather than relying on individuals themselves. So yeah, there are kind of wider organizational things that need to be done, that again, through proper consultation with actual staff, can lead to improvements. There are smaller kind of team things that need to be done, and then there are small well-being related things that all organizations can do. So whether it's silly things like having actual healthy food in a canteen that's open, or if it's ensuring people as far as possible take their lunch break and they finish at 9 to 5, and they foster and harness a proper culture of not overwork, but a culture of work in the hours that you should be working. There are so many things that need to be done, and that can be done for public sector organizations.
And I love that point about resilience. So I do talk about resilience a lot, but I talk about it in the sense of resilience is not about sucking up crappy behaviors. It's about saying, okay, what am I willing to not put up with, and what are the ways and resources I have to be able to challenge that, or what does challenge look like for me? So I'm really pleased you said that. And resilience is often treated like a sticking plaster, when you're right, it's about the systemic changes.
Yeah, exactly that. And there's a lot of talk when you listen to any and everything to do with organizations about resilience. And as you said, the problem is it kind of takes the issue away from the organization and places it onto the individual worker. So it says, right, if you're at risk, if your mental health or your physical health is at risk because of the workplace, it's not the workplace's fault, it's your fault because you're not resilient enough. But when you're a doctor and you're working 10 hours extra a week every week, or when you're a social worker and you've got 25 cases and then half of them can be kind of child abuse or neglect, or, there's only so much any individual can take. And so actually there needs to be systemic change in order to support the mental health and well-being of individuals. And so, yeah, you're right. It's about kind of knowing your own limits. And maybe that's what resilience should be, is about knowing your own limits and then making systemic changes, rather than just keep taking all the crap and we'll send you on, we'll kind of, we'll take you on a walk one lunchtime. That doesn't help. Yeah.
No. And also just thinking about then, one of your areas of work is about diversity, particularly around the Black experience and the lower outcomes in terms of what the systems do to mean that Black people receive worse treatment or inappropriate cultural treatment. So again, I know that you've done a lot of work around Black History Month for your university. I just wondered really around, how do we also have these conversations about culture, race, understanding the systemic injustices to improve services?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting one. And I've spoken to quite a few. I guess we can look at it from a staff perspective, like an employee perspective, but also for the public sector, you have the outcomes for the service users and patients, right? So for staff, like I did a couple of national surveys in social work, and they were kind of, it's a predominantly white female profession, but actually the non-white and Black in particular social workers who took part in the survey, they did suggest that they had experienced kind of really quite crappy experiences from both within the workplace and from the service users that they've been working with. So when you think about things like disciplinary procedures, and lack of promotion prospects, but also kind of receiving racism from some service users as well. That's kind of a 360, a whole kind of, you can't get away from it sometimes at work. So that's really interesting. But well, probably one of the best things about having a diverse workforce within the public sector is that because you're working with people, you have a greater understanding, or the workforce has a greater understanding of different cultures and different ways of living and different, all of those kind of good things that can lead to better outcomes within those populations. The other thing is kind of when you move away from staff and you think about the people that they're in the job to kind of work for and to serve, is about outcomes for service users and staff. So again, in social work, I was speaking to a guy called the social work tutor, who has a massive online following. And I was doing his podcast a few months ago. And, one of the things that he outlined that I thought that really stuck with me is that a white British social worker is a brilliant social worker. I think any social worker who's in the job is going to be doing a fantastic job. But a white British social worker who hasn't kind of grown up in maybe a Black African or hasn't experienced Black African cultures, they might go into a Black African household and think, wow, it's loud here, it's chaotic, there's lots and lots of people here. And that forms a negative opinion in their mind straight away. If they don't understand a culture and they have no way of understanding that culture, that can lead to negative outcomes for the service users. And we know, for example, that young Black boys are more likely to be placed in care than young white boys are in the UK. And we know all of the outcomes that are associated with that, right? So very few people from care backgrounds go on to university, whereas I think it's about a quarter of the prison population have been in care at some point in their life. Mm-hmm. So, it's not just that they kind of don't understand the culture and they might not quite get it and then they move on. Actually, it has a really big impact in so many areas of the service users' lives. And for fear of carrying on talking lots and lots and lots, the other area is, for example, in healthcare. And you think about healthcare and you think about, for example, the most recent example actually was about this thing called the COVID rash. And there was a study that was conducted that looked at a website that was there for practitioners as well as the public. And it gave examples of this rash that people often get when they have COVID and COVID-related symptoms. And it was found that out of 400 odd pictures of this COVID rash, only I think 2 of them were from a BAME, and I hate that term, but that's another one. Only 2 of them were from a kind of a non-white background. And you just kind of think, okay, I kind of get that the majority of the country is white, and therefore, white people really do need to be catered for, but actually so do the non-white people in this country. And actually those rashes don't manifest in the same way, and they don't look the same in non-white people as they do in white people. And then, it's things like if you kind of have a lack of oxygen, your lips will go blue. Well, ours probably won't. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. And I was having that conversation with someone this week actually, who used to be a nurse in Australia, and she was saying how this was not talked about, and how they classified people in a particular way. And I'm not going to use the words because they're just inappropriate nowadays, but in the late 60s, 70s, that's how they did it, reclassifications of peoples. And we were having this conversation about, well, actually, it's unlikely that our lips will turn blue in the same way, Jermaine, and would that be missed? And all of that.
Yeah, and I think I remember listening to LBC, and Nick Ferrari was talking about this, and he was kind of shouting about, maybe the people who are calling the health system racist because they don't cater for everybody. And I don't think anybody is ever saying that the health system is racist. The NHS does the job that people that work in the NHS do can't be understated in any way, shape or form. But there is a lack of representation. And I think that's more what it's about, as opposed to any kind of racist, undertones.
And I think it's that lack of understanding about culture. So your example that you gave about, if you went into, a particular type of household that identified as African, or whether they were second or third generation. When I did some work with an adult social care team, it was very interesting because we had, so a social worker went into a house, adult social worker, to assess the house, and it was a Polish house. And she was very upset because she felt this house was very bare, it was very stripped back. But luckily there was a Polish colleague in the team. So she came back and she said, oh gosh, this house was like this. And the Polish colleague said, yeah, that's a Polish house. We don't have trinkets everywhere. We don't have, and that's the power of it. And she said, because it was a session about cultural awareness, and she said, thank God we've got these resources, because I would have made a mistake. I would have put things about poverty. I would have made all these assumptions based on my framework. So I think it goes back to your point though, Jermaine, what I always talk about is just because white culture is the majority in the UK, that doesn't mean it's neutral. That's white culture, and it's the majority culture, and it's the majority lens. But I think that actually it's really important for people to take time out and unpack whiteness and their culture and what it means, and how when I run those sessions, some people find it easy and some people find it really, really tricky.
Yeah, and yeah, I completely agree. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's so important to have a diverse workforce as well, right? So coming back to this whole organizational psychology thing, having a diverse workforce in the public sector, private sector, whatever, is so important. So another example is I do some work outside of the university. I do some work with the police, and trying to kind of hold them to account for behaviours and outcomes for Black people in Gloucestershire, where I live. And there was a video going around social media, and it looked like there was a kind of overuse of force by the police on a Black guy who didn't seem to be resisting. But that wasn't necessarily the issue that I'm focusing on. But the police released a statement the same day that kind of said, "There's nothing wrong, and we're gonna kind of dictate to the Black community why we thought there was nothing wrong." And I just thought, if you had, and actually I said this in the meeting to the external comms people, if you had a more diverse community, a more diverse communications team, you wouldn't put out a statement that said that kind of thing. Like, your statement would be more sensitive culturally and to individuals that were affected. So, I mean, there are so many reasons to have and to need a diverse workforce. But unfortunately, we don't have that diverse workforce at the very top of organizations. And without more people being at the top of those organizations, there are very few people to make those decisions that understand the need for a diverse workforce.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that kind of brings me on to asking you about apps. So I know that you had an ESRC research funded project that led to the development of a smartphone app, going back to then talking about Wellbeing. And I just wondered, how you think, first of all, how you think apps can help people with their mental health and wellbeing, given the sort of period of time that we're in with everything going on, but also how, building on that point about diversity, how they can take an intersectional approach, how these tools can work for disabled communities, global majority Black communities, LGBTQIA+, different ages, etc. And how can we all make it work together?
So, two really good questions. So first of all, how they can support mental health and well-being. I mean, again, by looking at and developing these things alongside the people that you want to work with, or that you are working with, and that are the recipient of the app, and you're looking to support their well-being. That's the best way to do it. So in our case, we had some kind of psychoeducational stuff. And psychoeducation is effectively just kind of saying, look, this is what the signs and symptoms of ill or kind of poor mental health look like. So this is then what you can do to support that. And there are some organizational sources of support, and there are some external sources of support and that kind of thing. So, that's just kind of information sharing. But I think it's information that a lot of people don't have. A lot of people don't quite recognize when they're on the precipice until it's a bit too late. So there was some kind of educational information sharing stuff. There was some communication stuff as well. So as I said, a lot of organizations go through so many different changes, and there's a complete distinct lack of communication around that. But what the app that we did, and what I think a lot of apps could do, is allow kind of either anonymous or non-anonymous discussions between people who are doing the day-to-day work and the people who make the big decisions. And one of the things that I find in the public sector, and it may be the same in the private sector, is that a lot of people find that their kind of opinion is asked on something, but it feels like it's a tick box exercise. So like they're asked kind of, I don't know, a consultation on what wellbeing events should be held. 1,000 people give their views, and then senior management have already made a decision, you know? And so actually apps can support in that kind of communication thing. The other thing that we did, and this was pretty novel actually, with social work, is that we employed what's called a vocational rehab assistant. And that person was a trained occupational therapist. And the VRA, his role was to, if an individual kind of through the app or through whatever reason recognize that they were starting to struggle with their mental health, they could speak to the vocational rehab guy, and he would kind of give them hints and tips on how they can support themselves and point them in the direction of occupational health or EAPs or their doctor or whatever. So that was one side of it. But we also know that keeping people at work, even if it is on kind of reduced hours or reduced caseload or reduced workload or whatever organizational changes need to be made, keeping people at work is better for that individual's health. It's better for the organization. It's better for service users, patients, whoever. And so what he did is he kind of mediated between the individual, the management, HR, and occupational health to make changes to that individual's job in order to keep them at work. So actually, we know work is a good thing, and good work is good for people. So that is one of the things that the vocational rehab guy did, is he tried to kind of change the way that people were working when they were starting to struggle in order to keep them at work. So there are loads of things that apps can do in terms of mental health and well-being beyond just, I mean, at the moment, I think there's a care app. I don't know if you've seen it, Layla, the Careforce app.
No, I don't think I have, but I will definitely put it in the show notes.
So the Careforce app, I think, generally, it was released by the Department of Health and Social Care during COVID, because there's very little support for social care. I think before the app was developed, there was like a text messaging service where you could text them and say, I'm struggling, and they might give you some general advice, and that was it. So they released this, and I look on the app every now and again, and the app is basically just, look, here's where you can get some cheap money off vouchers, and these are some basic things you can do to look after your well-being, and that's pretty much it. And I think apps like that are just kind of pointless. They don't support well-being. They are, again, just there as a tick box exercise. So when these kind of interventions are developed, they need to be developed by the workforce, for the workforce, and not just some kind of token effort to support people.
Yeah, and I think that's I think your example is really helpful, because it's that interface, isn't it? You've got an app, but you've also got a person, and the way that interface, that real person, can, you use the word mediate, be that support and kind of bring people together so you can stay in work, because we know that's a really important part of recovery.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, colleagues know these stats better than I do, but I think there's something like if a person's off work for a month, they're likely to be off work for 6 months due to stress-related sickness absence. And, in the UK, the health and social care sectors have the highest levels of stress and mental health sickness absence. And that's not, that doesn't happen by accident, And we know that stress, anxiety, and depression are the number one cause for long-term sickness absence, so anything that's over 4 weeks, and second for short-term absences, which is less than 4 weeks, behind like colds and flu. So again, if we can keep people at work, even in a reduced capacity of some sort, or it's in a changed kind of a slightly changed job role, or whatever needs to be changed in order to reduce or kind of diminish the source of those stresses, then it's better for, again, the individual, the organization, and ultimately it's better for the people that they're in that job for. Because let's face it, kind of 99% of social workers, doctors, nurses, admin support, everybody, none of those people are in the job for the money. They're in the job because they make a difference every single day of their working lives. So keep them at work and they can continue to make that difference and support people. Your other question was about the intersectionality, how they can be used to support people, for example, who have a disability or global majority, et cetera, and that's a hard one. And to be honest, I don't know the answer to the question. It's not something that I have looked at. I think there are some things, again, about communication. So I think there are some things about communication within the organization. So bottom-up communication in particular. I think you can also develop kind of peer support groups. So one of the biggest buffers towards negative mental health at work is the support that you gain from the peers around you. And often if you're in a majority white space, as the only kind of first generation Black African, you may feel a little bit of an outsider. So maybe there can be some kind of group peer support things that are put together in order to support people who have a disability or are LGBTQ plus or are global majority or whatever. But I honestly don't know the right answer to that part of the question.
And I guess there isn't a right answer per se, but I suppose I was thinking about testing, the developers that work in organizations, are they from, again, it goes back to our point that we discussed, from diverse backgrounds? Who's there to question you? You don't know what you don't know. So who's there to illuminate your blind spots? So it might be those peer support groups, but it might be that you go to other organizations that can help, for example, Stonewall, Black groups, Black health groups. I'm thinking about Black mental health, Mind Matters, etc. But yeah, so I guess those were my thoughts. And so Jermaine, I just wanted to finish with really asking you, you do a lot of work in this space in mental health and wellbeing. So what are your top 3 tips for looking after your own mental health and wellbeing? Because, we often don't practice what we preach, but what are your top 3 things that you do to make sure that you stay well?
So one of them is definitely that I don't do my job in order to live my life, but it allows me to live the life that I want to live. And that means I can kind of take a step away and not get overly massively stressed and distressed at work. So my job it's a great job and I love doing it. But what it does allow me to do is it allows me to do the other things that I like doing. So it allows me to spend a whole bunch of time with my kids and family and friends and all of those things. So actually one of the things that I do is I'm not kind of the academic whose life revolves around their job. I don't allow that. So, but I guess that I know that's really hard for people who work, again, in the public sector, because every day they are making such a massive difference. So that doesn't help. One of the things that I do every week is I try and do lots of exercise. So I've always loved sport. And I think doing and discovering or even rediscovering something that you like doing and that you've previously liked doing and you've previously done a lot of will be really useful. And so it allows you to kind of take your mind away from the workplace and from COVID and even sometimes from the family, because kids can be stressful, man.
That's why I don't have any.
Oh, yeah. So that's one thing. So find something that you love, and there are standard things to do with kind of exercise. Exercise is good for you in so many different ways. And whether you start with the couch to 5K thing, or if you just do Joe Wicks a few times a week, or whatever it is that you want to do, exercise is really useful. So I think it's kind of being able to take a step away from work is important. I find exercise or just a thing that you love is really important. And then just spending time with the people that you like spending time with, because again, they can take away some of those difficult things that you might experience at work. It allows you to take a step back from work, which is really useful and really important, especially if you are, for example, a social worker who has been just you guys will have been under the cosh since the very first day that you stepped into a social work team. And so it's got to be important for you to take a step away, right? So yeah, they're the things that I would do is find something you love, do some exercise, and try and take a step away from work every now and again.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Jermaine. And if people want to know more about you and your work, I've included your Twitter handle in the show notes and also a link to your webpage on the Bath Spa University website. But is there anything else you wanted to tell listeners before we finish today, or about Contact or the projects that you'll be working on?
So I think kind of that's it. So the next project we're looking to work on is a national project of social worker and healthcare staff mental health and wellbeing. So if you're interested, send me a message on Twitter or an email or whatever. That's all good. Brilliant.
So thank you so much, Jermaine. That was a fascinating insight, specifically into public health, the wellbeing initiatives that can work from a research base. And my guest last week, Chloe Goff, talked about being a practical academic, which seems to very much resonate with the work you do as well. So thank you so much for your time. And listeners, we'll see you in the next episode, and stay safe, where we'll be talking more about mental health and inclusion. Thanks for listening to the Diverse Minds podcast. Don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you access your podcasts from. You can also connect with me on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Tune into next week's episode of the podcast, where I'll bring you more insights on mental health and inclusion. Bye for now.